Today's guest is Rob Prince. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing pretty good, thank you. How you doing, Jeremy?
Great, man. I'm healthy.
All right.
As I told you before, if you're healthy, they say everything else you shouldn't complain about.
I agree with that.
So, Rob, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because there is a whole plethora of things that describe who Rob Prince is.
Oh, my gosh. Well, let's see. Name is Rob Prince. I'm a retired senior lecturer of international studies at the University of Denver's Korbel School of International Studies. Originally from New York City, a long time ago. Spent some time, 3 years, close to 3 years, in the Peace Corps in North Africa, way back in the day, and came to Colorado in the spring of 1969, and have been there ever since, mostly teaching college, married, wife is a retired nurse, 2 daughters and 2 grandsons. In terms of this issue that we're going to be talking about today, the Israeli war on Gaza, I've experienced in this area a number of ways. First, in my teaching, my area of expertise, if you like, or considerable knowledge, is basically about the Maghreb, North Africa, 2 countries, one Tunisia, the other Algeria. One had oil, Algeria, the other didn't, Tunisia, and just comparing, if you like, the political economy of those countries. And then I'm Jewish. I want to talk a little bit about that, when we get into it, what it all means. But it's hard, if you're Jewish, not to follow this issue, the issue of Israel and Palestine, although for a very long time, the views that I have held really, for more than half a century, they really haven't changed at all, were not, one could say, particularly popular in the Jewish community, although now what we're seeing is a lot more support, not just among Jews, but generally speaking. So I think that's enough of an intro. Glad to be here. All right.
You also work with some, I know some other organizations.
That's correct, yes. Well, of late, there are a couple of young Jewish groups that have emerged. The groups aren't that new. One is Jewish Voice for Peace. The other is called Not in My Name. And basically, these are groups of relatively young people. When I say young people, all right, at the age of 79, I'm talking about people under the age of 35. And both of these organizations, and there are others, by the way, that are quite similar. They've come up in the last 5 to 10 years. They really began to organize, and what distinguishes them from mainstream Jewish and pro-Zionist organizations is from the very outset they've been critical of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories, and that was there have always been critics, Jewish critics of Israel, but not organizationally based quite as much. And so, take for example Jewish Voice for Peace, October 7th. And this, I was told by local organizers of that of JV, we call it JVP here, that it nationally had about 35,000 members, and since October 7th, again according to them, they're up to 350,000. They've had an extraordinary growth spurt in this recent period, and what's new about that is there's like whole generations of Jewish Americans that more or less were, in one way or another, were kind of ardent supporters of Israel. And now what we're seeing, particularly among the youth, and then some old codgers like myself, but the whole generation of Jewish youth that is seeing the things differently. It doesn't buy into the mainstream narrative, and wants to do something about it. So that's, from where I'm sitting, that's really encouraging, and whatever I can do to, help them, I do.
Yeah, we just had Joe Mayall on. Mayall, sorry, I kind of pronounced that kind of fast. And this. I think we recorded that. We released it yesterday. I think we recorded that earlier this week. And one thing that stood out to me in the conversation with him, because I sometimes like to have these thoughts of, when it comes to peace, for example,
All right.
can't we all just, learn to live with each other? The old cliche from what Rodney King said, can't we all
Yes.
just get along? And he said, yeah, that's fine. Joe's response to me was, that's great. And we all want that. Most people want that. But he stressed to me that in this particular situation in Palestine, between the Israelis and Israel and Palestine, he said, you cannot have peace if you still have occupation. And that was his answer, his response to that. And I guess it made sense.
No, it makes sense to me too.
What is your thoughts on that?
Well, the way that people talk about this conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is the way it's portrayed in the media, let me put it that way, and by our government. You'd think that we're dealing with two nations, all right? One's a little stronger, the one's a little bit weaker, i.e. the Israelis are stronger, Palestinians obviously aren't. And why can't they make peace, all right? But the situation, if you look at it objectively, is a little bit different. What we're really looking at is a colonial situation. Israel is what I would call a settler colonial state. This is not to get too technical, but the closest thing to it is what the French did in Algeria, okay? I.e., and I use that example, develop it just a little bit. France comes into Algiers I think it was like 1830, something like that, 1832, and it sets up a colony there. What's the pretext? On what grounds, or what was, if you like, the excuse that they use? Well, we used to have influence here. We were part of the Roman Empire. It's pretty thin logic. And basically, they wanted a colony in North Africa, and they set it up. And what they did was they brought people from France, settlers, to come, and those settlers took the best lands, and they expelled from those lands the native people, Algerian Arab people. And that situation lasted from 1832 until 1962. What happened in 1962? There was an 8-year war for independence that Algeria fought, and the French colonizers, who claimed that they had rights to Algeria going back forever, and they were kicked out. In the case of Zionism, it's a little bit different in that we're not talking about a particular government like the French government or the German government or British whatever, but we're talking about a population, European-based for the most part, Ashkenazi Jews, who found themselves in a conflict. And the conflict was at the end of the 19th century. A lot of societal changes were taking place in Europe and elsewhere, but for our purposes, we're really talking about Europe. And European Jews found themselves in a kind of bind. And there was a rise of anti-Semitism that took place. Anti-Semitism, or hatred of Jews, is very old, but modern anti-Semitism is not. It really dates from post-Civil War, if you like, using U.S. Dates. And what were the choices open to Jews in that period? Well, there really were a number of them. Many Jews became radicals, Marxists, socialists, communists, whatever, and moved to overthrow capitalism if they could, and they saw that as the solution. The second option was assimilation. And, Jews were assimilated in a number of countries. The country where they were the most assimilated in Europe was Germany, interestingly enough. Well, we know what happened to the Jews in Germany and Europe during World War II. So assimilation becomes, if you like, a non-option for European Jewry. And then the third option was, well, let's create a state for our own people somewhere else where we can be safe. Now, of course, that sounds so reasonable in many ways. So what's the problem? What's the hitch here? Well, there's several hitches. The first hitch is there really was no place in the world that wasn't populated. Okay. Secondly, although
let me ask you really quick.
Sure.
So when you say for their people being Jewish people,
yes,
but they're also is that in the context of a religion, or is that in the context of a race of people, an ethnicity of people?
Okay. Yeah. Well, historically, Jews are religion, not a race. You have Jews living in China, in India. The Jews in China look just as Chinese as the others. The Jews in India look just as Indian as the others. There are Jews in fact, there still are in Iran.
The Jews in New York look just as New Yorkish.
That's right, absolutely.
Which I want to say, it's crazy that I wore this hat today. It was not.
That's beautiful.
I didn't know you were from New York.
Yeah, right. Well, the problem with growing up in New York is you think that the whole world is Jewish. Then you leave New York.
Yeah.
And you find out, wow, there's folks in this country who aren't Jewish.
Right.
Oh my gosh, how'd that happen?
Well, that's because the neighborhoods back east are so big.
Yes. Well, I did know there were Irish and Italians in New York City because
and Polish people,
and Polish,
Puerto Ricans.
Right.
Yeah.
But in any case,
so you're saying that the Jewish people as a religion were looking for a home. So that would mean you would have every race of people.
Well, actually, yes, with a caveat, and the caveat is the movement to establish a political home for Jews. Zionism is European based in its origins, absolutely. The founder, or the one who's considered, if you like, the father of the movement, Theodor Herzl, was an Austrian Jew. The base of the early Zionist movement is actually Eastern European Jews who came from Russia and Poland and Ukraine, places like that. Part of what was referred to.
But they were Russian. They were Ukrainian.
Yes,
they were
correct.
Polish.
Yes, absolutely.
By race.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They weren't. There's no such thing as a Jewish race. Judaism is I call it a religious culture, if you like. What's always moved Judaism has been the religion itself, and which is amazing that it's survived as long as it has, and also what it's contributed to humanity, quite frankly.
I agree with you, and I know that. I just wanted to clarify that because there seems to be a lot of that going around in the media where people talk about Jewish people as a race of people.
All right, but we're not. That is and of it. Let's just put it in the most polite way. It's a racial characterization which is false. There's no such thing as a Jewish race. Now, of course, anti-Semites, Hitler and others, they talk about a Jewish race.
Right.
They use that term, but that term is incredibly inaccurate, always has been.
Right. There's not a Christian race. There's not a Muslim race. Right. There's not, there's predominantly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but European Jewry was in crisis, and one of the options was to establish a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland, but a political system which favored Jews. And that's what Zionism is. Now, they had a problem, and the problem was, where should it be? So Palestine was not the only option. There was lobbying to have a Jewish homeland in Uganda.
That's what I was just going to say. Uganda was, I think, their first choice.
Uganda, Argentina. Recently, I read there was actually a feeler out to establish a Jewish homeland in western Kansas. All right? During that time when we were told, the rains will follow the plow, the way they got so many settlers here in the aftermath of Civil War. But in the end, the appeal of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, based on, if you like, the Bible and the religion, was very strong. So those other choices faded away. But then they had another problem. They didn't have political power. The Zionist movement, how is it going to establish this homeland? And the only way it could do it was to go to the powerful countries of the day and say, hey, we'll cut a deal. We want a homeland. What can we do for you? And that Theodor Herzl and some of the early other Zionists, they went everywhere. They went to the Ottoman Empire. Okay, they went to Germany before World War I. They were, I don't remember if they went to France or not, but where they found a home was in 1970, at the end of World War I, was in Britain. And that's also kind of a very interesting, complicated
When you say
story.
they found a home, they found somebody that would give them their agreement.
Yes, they found a sponsor.
Yeah.
They found a sponsor for their project.
I didn't know they went to the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, they did.
into
Absolutely.
France.
They did. Yes.
I did know that all this was done around the time of the First World War.
Yes, it's at the end of the First World War, you've got three empires that collapse. You have the Russian Empire, what's referred to as the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. And in the aftermath of that collapse, the political geography, both of Europe and of the Middle East, changed. Now, something else was happening in those days, because the Middle East, I would say, going back as far as Napoleon, when Napoleon invades Egypt, the Middle East is already important as a trade route between Asia, China, and Europe, if you like. So that's really long. But by 1917, there's another factor that enters into the British interest, not just in the Zionist movement, but in the Middle East itself, and that was oil. And the role that oil and in those days it was oil, natural gas wasn't quite as important. And the fight over who was going to control that oil, the really key players were the British and the French. And if you look at how the Middle East was divided at the end of World War I, you'll see that France got a nice chunk of it, and France and Britain are the two biggest winners. And then they're competing with one another for what? For control of those regions where they know there's oil. And we're talking about northern Iraq in particular, but also Iran. So oil becomes a factor. And something else is happening in those days. And I talk about this because once you understand how it all comes together, it begins to make sense, or it certainly makes sense to me. What was the problem for Britain and France in terms of Middle Eastern oil? The problem was that this is also a period of the growth of nationalism in the region. So not just Zionist, Jewish nationalism, but Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism explodes. In the same period, in fact, Arab nationalism and Zionism have quite an similar history historically in terms of when they begin. All right, the concern of the British then, and then the Americans later, is they were concerned of the people of themselves, the people of the Middle East themselves controlling the oil. And they had to find a way to dominate those oil fields. And one of the ways was to divide the region into small little units. So Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, all these little things, rather than, if you like, a cultural religious whole, an Arab world. All right, what's the deal here? What are these divisions? It's real simple. It's divide and conquer. Smaller units are easy to control, and smaller units are also easy to pressure in terms of oil and gas contracts. All right? So this is really at the heart of what at that point was British Middle Eastern policy, the control of oil, at a time where oil is simply replacing coal as the main source of energy, and whoever controls the oil of the Middle East already is going to have their lever on global power. So that's it. Now, where does Zionism come in? What does I'm talking about oil again. What does Zionism have to do with any of that? Well, for the British wanted a population that could support its interests. If you look at the early Zionists and where they went once, this Balfour Declaration, this declaration that's done by the British Foreign Minister, it's a strange thing if you look at it, the Balfour Declaration. Why is it strange? It's a British foreign minister who's making a statement talking about how Palestine should be divided between Jews and Arabs without consulting the people of the region. Actually, it never even went through, if I remember correctly, the British Parliament. So it's a funny document that's used to justify, if you like, the Zionist movement. Now, it's true. There was a Balfour Declaration, and the Israelis have used it. It has no international legal status to this day.
The British did occupy Palestine at that time.
Absolutely, yes, at the end of the war.
Yep.
Yes. The region is occupied partly by the British and a little bit further north by the French. And then the British and the French actually nearly come to war with each other over the oil in Iraq in places like Mosul. And in fact, the French were supposed to get it, and the British moved in. So that's what they're really fighting about. Where Zionism comes into what was Zionism going to do? What did the British see in the Zionist movement?
Just for clarification, before you move on to that, the Balfour Declaration was signed, wasn't it like 1919 or 1918?
1917, yeah. Okay, but you're in the right ballpark.
Way before 1948.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. But the key to that is it becomes even if it's not recognized by an international law, still it becomes the green light for the early phase of Zionist expansion into what was British Palestine. Okay? And it takes off after that. It takes off between the wars. It's never as much as it's going to be after World War II, but there's considerable migration to Palestine in the period between the two wars that's taking place. But what the Jewish population in Palestine was for the British was a foil against the local nationalist movements. That's really, and there was another factor that entered into it too. If you look at where Jewish settlers were encouraged to go in British Mandate Palestine, it was to the north. It was to the northern regions, what today would be close to the Lebanese border. Now, why were they encouraged to do that? Well, for Britain, Palestine really was also control of the Suez Canal. Is the buffer zone for the Suez Canal. And their fear after World War I, besides Arab nationalism, was that the French might come down from Lebanon and might try to seize the Suez Canal. I mean, if you look historically, these countries that are supposedly allies, Britain and France, I mean, they are just at each other pretty much, just like Britain and Russia over Central Asia,
like Britain and America in the 1700s.
Right. So that's how it all begins. And Zionism has always needed a sponsor, and it needs to produce for the sponsor. There's certain responsibilities that it has. Now, I mean, this is kind of a long introduction, but I think it's important. After World War II, what changes? Well, Britain loses most of its power and influence in the Middle East, and the United States becomes the major international player, the world power that I wouldn't say controls the region, but tries to and has great influence in the region.
And I had also read something that at that time, because as you know, the Ottoman Empire had been divided up previously.
That's correct.
And at that time, the Ottoman, all the Arab, I can't say Ottoman Empire because it wasn't there anymore, but all the Arab countries and the Middle Eastern countries were talking about coming back together again.
That's yes. There was
so was that
Pan-Arabism, and Pan-Arabism, which is reemerging, at least in some forms today. But Pan-Arabism is precisely what first the British and then the United States have been trying to avoid all these years, and have avoided it up until now. So World War II happens, and the tragedy of World War II happens. But let's remember certain things about even that, because there's a basic disconnect here. Where is it that Jews suffered such horror? It was in Europe. All right? The solution should have been in Europe. Instead, you take a problem that was a European problem is probably too mild a word for it, and then you superimpose it on a region that, quite frankly, had nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing. You can blame the Arabs for certain things, but you can't blame them for the Holocaust. So this is a European tragedy that then gets somehow repossessioned in the Middle East. And when I started to kind of look at this whole issue, that's what got me. It was like, well, why wasn't something done in Europe to make life more livable for Jews so that the Holocaust wouldn't happen again? So you've got that issue. Regardless, Israel is created in 1948. And even there, you begin to see all kinds of problems. First of all, if you look at what the United Nations partition was about, it was never been implemented. The UN partition in 1948 to divide Palestine into an Israeli state and a Palestinian Arab.
What was the original plan?
Well, the original plan was kind of to divide Palestine into two areas, both with approximately the same geography. What's the problem with? Well, the problem was that Jews at that time was something like 25-30% of the population, and Palestinian Arabs were still 70-75% of the population. So this created a dilemma for Israel. You're going to establish a Jewish state, and the majority of the people in it are Palestinian Arabs. This was problematic. A Jewish state in which, from its beginning until today, Jews would have privileges over anybody else, but particularly the Arab population. And so how are they going to do that? Well, they actually talk and write about it a lot in the early 1900s. How can we resolve this? And ultimately, what they come up with, and there really weren't a lot of there are really two options. Either we live in peace and equality with these folks, but then they're going to be a majority, and it's not going to be a Jewish state, a Jewish-dominated state, or we find some way to ethnically cleanse what was ancient Palestine so that Israel can be predominantly Jewish. And that's pretty much what happens in 1948. The Palestinians refer to it as the Nakba, the great tragedy. We don't know the numbers, but it's generally accepted that somewhere between 700 and 800,000 Palestinians were forced to leave. There were selective assassinations. The most famous, but it was not the only one, is referred to as Deir Yassin, where a village, men are separated from the women. I think the number of men that are just assassinated, just mowed down, something like 282. And there were 2 or 3 of these kind of massacres that took place. That scared the rest of them.
You said 200 and what? 82.
In that particular incident, the number that I recall, but on this, we need to check the exact number, but something like 280 male citizens were just lined up and shot.
Oh, okay.
Executed. Yeah. And that's referred to as Der Yassin. Any modern history of how Israel is formed, even with Israeli scholars, will talk about Der Yassin. The difference being that the Israeli scholars say, well, it's the exception to the rule, all right? And the Palestinians point out, well, it wasn't just Der Yassin, there were several other places. But regardless, this is how Israel basically was born. So it's born in the expulsion, the ethnic cleansing, if you like, of a significant portion of the Palestinian population.
Where did the name Israel come from? Who came up with that name?
That just that comes out of Jewish history and theology, and the short period of time when there was a Jewish state. It wasn't very long, by the way, but still there was one way back in time. That's where it came from.
And is that in the time of David?
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
Okay.
Yes.
I thought that's where it came from. I've never researched that myself. I was curious.
Yeah. Okay. One last thing here, because remember I started talking about settler colonialism, and then we got into the historical stuff. So I would only add here that Israel is a form of settler colonialism, but what makes it different from Algeria is rather than the colonizing force, i.e. France in the case of Algeria, the Zionist movement itself had to find a foreign sponsor, whether it was British or the United States. But still, other than that, it fits that model. All right, if you look at it from this perspective, because again, remember what we were talking about in the beginning, or what I was trying to develop is, this is not a conflict between 2 states. It's a conflict between a colonizing people, Zionism, the Zionist movement, and a colonized people from the very beginning. And so it's an anti-colonial, what the Palestinians are involved in is what I would refer to as an anti-colonial struggle. And what they're trying to accomplish is a state of their own in part of what used to be Palestine. And that part of that call for a state of its own is also it's recognized by international law. And that international law is the United Nations resolutions, particularly the UN Resolution 242, but there are also a series of other resolutions that calling for a 2-state solution. That remains, to this day, the framework, if you like, for a peace settlement, the international framework for a peace settlement. I don't know whether it will happen or not. But
understanding that is the I guess it's the guidebook that everybody's still rolling with.
Yeah.
It's impossible to have a 2-state solution right now. The way that the country, well, just because of the way the country is broken up. Like what portion are you going to give the Palestinians? You can't ask hundreds of thousands of settlers to move out.
Why not? They're illegal.
Okay,
but that's not the main issue, by the way.
You could ask for sure.
Yeah. Well, of course, you'd have to ask rather assertively. But leave that aside for a minute. Because there's really several aspects to what you just said. So yeah, there's a little piece here, there's Gaza over there, there's the West Bank here, there's East Jerusalem there. Well, East Jerusalem, needless to say, and the West Bank are connected. But the real issue is the disconnect between the West Bank and Gaza. So how do you
Well, even the West Bank is spotted now. It's
right.
completely
One thing
separated.
at a time. We'll come back to that. That's
Gotcha.
fair. Fair question. In the early UN documents, UN resolutions on this, it's quite clear that if there's going to be a two-state solution that includes the West Bank and Gaza, there has to be some kind of corridor between the two, all right? This is understood. It's been talked about. Of course, it hasn't happened yet, but that's how that would work. And it's not the only example in the world of places that are geographically separate from each other that are part of the same country, all right? You could start with the United States, right? I mean, how is it that we can connect to Alaska and Hawaii? Geographically, they're separated. There's a part of Russia, what they used to call Königsberg. I forget what it's called today. It's in the news now. It's also geographically separated. So there are a number of examples. What's missing here, of course, is the political will. The area, the so-called corridor between the West Bank and Gaza, that would, needless to say, go through Israel. Virtually, very sparsely populated. It would not necessarily be that big a deal on that part of it. And by the way, what I'm really expressing here is what I call standard arguments for a two-state solution. All right, the bigger question has to do with the settlements. That's what you were talking about, weren't you, when you said, well, it's the West Bank is already well divided up. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So that's a harder one. Okay. There are a number of options there. What you need to keep in mind is all of those settlements are, by international law, illegal. So whether or not they've been there, they are illegal, and there's not even the United States would question that, the legality of the settlements. What could happen to the settlements? I see a number of options. I don't know. They could be dismantled. All right, that's one option. This would come out of the negotiating process. I don't know how it would end. The other option is that there would be some kind of land swap. That was suggested in 2000 when it looked like maybe they were coming a little bit closer to an agreement. So yes, it's a thorny issue. All right, it's a thorny, unquestionably. Is it an impossible issue? Not from where I'm sitting. I mean, when Israel left Gaza, they had to dismantle settlements. The number of settlers was certainly not as large as the West Bank. It was something like 8,000, if I remember right. But still,
it wasn't very many.
Yeah. So what you're talking about are what I would call practical obstacles, and how they would be dealt with. They are issues. I just don't see them as impossible issues. What's missing in all this is the political will to resolve this conflict. And that's, in my mind, that's far more important than these practical issues, although I don't deny that they would have to be negotiated and that would take some finesse, as they say, to do it. But I don't see it as impossible at all.
Whose political will? Who's resisting that? Which governments? I think the U.S. has demonstrated they want things to be figured out, right?
No, not right.
No? Explain.
Well, the United States, let me use just this one example, because there's so many.
By figured out, I mean they
would like a two-state solution.
Two-state solution, correct.
Unquestionably, the two-state solution is official policy. It's true. You're right. And there's a little bit of hope in that. But, it's that contradiction between watch what I do and not what I say. All right? So what is it so what we say is two-state solution. What do? Do we put any pressure on Israel? No, or very, very little. Classic example now, when even Biden said it yesterday or the day before, Biden was saying, too many civilian deaths. He was saying that, okay? Good, I'm really glad to hear that our president has finally come to this conclusion. The problem is, When this whole incident, and we can get into it whenever you want, actually, but when it began, what did the United States do? It, number one, put in for $14 billion aid package to Israel, and secondly, emptied its military stores of weapons.
Mm-hmm. And supported the siege on Gaza.
That's right.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So how can the United States be a neutral or fair negotiator? How can it be seen as that? And this example now, and again, we can talk about this all you want in a little bit, but historically, that has also been what the United States has done. It has, some of its positions haven't been so terrible, but ultimately, it really has. It has not in any way done what it could in practical means to help for this two-state solution and the establishment of a Palestinian state. And then you have to ask, why not? That's a very interesting question. Because why do you have, on the one hand, this policy that, at least formally, it's reasonable, and it's also in coordinates with the policies of the rest of the world, but in practice, you haven't done anything.
I keep hearing the same question. I've heard it from pro-Israel people that label themselves as pro-Israel. I've heard it from people who are just neutral, and I've heard it from other friends of mine. The same question keeps coming up. Why? They don't understand. I've heard it from U.S. military people. Also, they say this. They ask the same question. Why is U.S. supporting Israel just like blindly, like indefinitely with?
All right. This is a really good question. What do you think? Is that fair to ask you?
Yeah. So I have thoughts on it. I mean, just based upon what I see, and to me, I see it as an ally in the region who aligns with Europe, America, kind of those type of countries. That's one thing. I never really thought about oil because I didn't think there was any oil in Israel.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
Now there's a little natural gas off the coast. We should talk about that too.
But natural gas is dying away too,
right,
as far as with the technology we're using and stuff like that. Back, World War I and World War II, like you said, oil was power, but now that's kind of fading away. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Just because of them being allies.
All right, and that. I feel like the teacher in me. That's correct, Jeremy. But it doesn't really explain it.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No.
All right. So the follow-up question is, so why they're our ally? All right. Why? What is it they can? Because they don't have the oil, right? They don't have the. So
let me expand on my answer.
Right.
Answer then.
Okay.
Allow me a extra credit chance at this.
You got it.
So. An ally in an area where America has a lot of people that are not allies. So you have an ally in the region.
All right, now you're getting closer. Okay.
So yeah, that's my answer.
All right. Not bad. Not bad. Well,
I'll take it.
But I'll tell you why I appreciate what you're saying, because you're not buying into, and this. I'm trying to find a polite word for it, but I can't. This is about shared values. Okay. Oh, Israel, they all need democracy and all that. This is about strategic interests. So you understand that, but it's not quite clear. Well, what are we talking about? Because after all, Israel doesn't have the oil. The Saudis and the Iraqis, whatever, they do. All right. Here's how it works. It took me a while to understand this too. The United States has always preferred weak and a little bit or a lot backward allies in the Middle East. Why? Because they're the easiest ones to kind of squeeze oil and gas out of. They're not the super nationalists that say, we're going to use this oil and gas for us first and we'll think about you later. Okay? Think about, I remember long time ago, but when there was this, Arab oil boycott after the 1973 war, and what were people here in Colorado, because I remember it, what were people saying, besides the fact that they were getting into fights over in gas stations, because you know how patient the American people can be? They were saying, the nerve of those Arabs. That's our oil. That's our oil. They're seizing our oil. Well, they're seizing their own oil. The United States has really tried to have allies that would be very pliable when it comes to the control of oil and gas, and that oil and gas, to control the oil and gas in the Middle East. I don't know if it's exactly the same thing today, but mostly it was basically to control the global economy. All right, not so much because we needed that oil, the Europeans needed it, and the Asians needed it. So who controls that oil has a powerful lever, or had powerful lever on the rest of the world. So we had preferred weaker allies, like the Saudi kings, okay, like Iran under the Shah. So, and Israel, it's in Israel's advantage that the Arab world remain weak and backward. Why? Because an Arab world that's weak, backward, and divided is not going to be a threat to Israel. So what happens is Israel's survival merges with U.S. strategic interests. And they were, at least until recently, interested pretty much in the same thing. And that was keeping the Arab world, and we have to add Iran to that too, to keeping them as weak as backward as possible, because then we could dominate their energy resources. Now, for most of the post-war period, I mean, there's a lot of history here.
Post-war,
post-World War II period. Well, as it starts, the U.S. sees two strategic allies in the Middle East, allies that for their own reasons are going to support U.S. interests in the region. And those two allies were Iran and Israel. Iran is a much bigger country, a non-Arab but Muslim country, much bigger force. But Iran and Israel, and there's a term for countries that are kind of our allies that kind of, I wouldn't say down to the last detail, but on the major points follow our lead. They're called proxies.
For those who don't know, I believe the Iranians, because you said they're not Arab, I believe they're Persian, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's I think 10% are Arab, but mostly they're Persian. Yes.
And they have some Turks.
Yes, they have some Turks as well. Yes, yes. So you have these two regional allies who, because of their own interests, they coincide with that of Washington and its allies. And then what happens in 1979? The Iranian Revolution happens. The United States loses its major ally in the region. What happens to the influence of Israel? Becomes more important. Now, it's true, we have, Saudi Arabia is an ally, Kuwait. What's the difference there? Well, these are first of all, they might have a lot of oil, but small populations, and, democracy is not high on their agenda. Let's put it that way. All right? So Israel emerges as the key allies that the United States has for strategic reasons in that part of the world. And it knows that. Israel knows that. And so in this kind of relationship between Israel and the United States, Israel has tried to use that relationship for its own ends. Okay, That's part of what we're looking at here. So I hope that kind of explains or gives you at least an understanding of this question, why we support Israel that way. Because Israel has defended U.S. strategic interests in the Middle East and done it quite well.
Yeah,
until recently.
I agree. That's the way I see that relationship. What are your thoughts about people that say that this is not that region is not the Palestinians' land? You hear that a lot.
Yeah, you hear it a lot. There's not much to that. Well, there's really two aspects to it. First is the claim that Zionist Jews are returning to their homeland. Please, from a biblical sense, of course, ancient Israel is that's where it all started. No question about it.
And I agree with you. Yeah, I do.
Okay, but just that it's very weak. The people that we call the Palestinian people, in one form or another, have lived there for, at least 1,500 years since they became Muslim, since the region became, there's some Christians, yes, but since it became Muslim, it's not true. In fact, it's such a bold-faced lie that, there are some things that in history and politics that they're not exactly lies, but they twist the truth in such a way that you don't see what's going on. But the notion that the people that are called the Palestinian people are not, this isn't their homeland and they haven't been there, it's nonsense. It's just propaganda, or call it what you like. It's very disturbing to me to hear it. And there was a quote from Golda Meir, a very, very famous quote, about trying to explain why Palestine for Zionist Jews. And she said, we're a people without a land, and there's a land without a people. But that's not true. It was a thriving community, one of the more prosperous communities in the Ottoman Empire. Now, what is true, but it's not just the case of Palestine, it's true for the entire Middle East, Africa as a whole. Quite frankly, you probably could apply it in Latin America as well, is that what we call modern national boundaries and modern nationalism, that doesn't really emerge until the late 19th century. But that's a global phenomenon. So I guess you could say, yes, there was no Palestinian national movement. Actually, the more you look at it, and I over the years I've looked at it quite a bit, there actually was a Palestinian movement against the Ottoman Empire. There was. So we could talk about Palestinian nationalism. It's simply the accusation is simply playing with history and playing with the truth, and the only folks that buy into that argument are people that really don't know the history of the region. Well, Americans tend not to know the history of that region or any other region or whatever, not too much, so you can get away with it. But it's a weak argument at best. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, it confuses me because from what I've even read, even in the Bible, which most Christian Americans read and take to church with them every week and everything, it even talks about the Philistines and the Canaanites that were there. Yeah. And that's where the Palestinians come from. In fact, what Palestinians have told me is they're not even Arab. They come from the Canaanites and the Philistines, because it wasn't called Palestinians at that time. And if you look at the Bible, it's pronounced, I think, Philistines.
The Philistines, yeah. The Philistines, the evil Philistines.
Yeah. That's who David would have get. Wasn't Goliath the Philistine?
He was a Philistine.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's not like that history is irrelevant, because it's actually fascinating history and worth studying. How much it really connects to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I would argue, is very, 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 very tangential at best. Okay, it's a modern problem. When people want to, they want to obscure what's going on. That these people have been fighting for 2,000 years. Please, that's garbage.
Everybody's been fighting.
Yeah, everybody to a certain degree, and you can overstate it, and sometimes it is overstated. But generally speaking, there was a small, and it was really not very big, but there was a small Jewish population in Palestine over time, a Christian population. It functioned within the context of the Islamic, it's called the Jama system, and that is Muslims are favored and privileged, but there are what are called the people of the book. And the people of the book include Christians and Jews. And Christians and Jews should be treated not with equality, because they weren't, but with respect. All right? And yes, there are incidents that Jews suffered in the Arab world and in the Islamic world, but it's nothing compared to what went on in Europe. I mean, Europe, it starts with the Crusades. Oh my gosh. Well, we're going to go, the Crusaders. Well, we got to go take Jerusalem for the Christians, but let's kill some Jews first for practice. And that happened with, I can't tell you how many of those first early Crusades. So yeah, it's saying too much to say, the Jews and the Christians in the time of Islamic domination, they lived in peace all the time. Please. But you're going to compare it to Europe, and that's where, in practice, the situation of Jews in the Arab world and in the Muslim world was always better until the modern period, and then all hell breaks loose everywhere.
I don't know for sure, and tell me, please, if you know the answer to this, but it always seemed to me like, because we all know, well, and that Jews were in all of those countries. And they were living normal lives, had communities, practiced their religion freely, and they weren't really, and that's where I'm going with this, they weren't different countries at that time. In the time of the Ottoman Empire, they were fine and left alone, and there was no problems. They weren't discriminated against. It seemed like to me at the time where the Ottoman Empire got broken up and the British and the French got involved and a lot of the other political things happened in all of those regions and then when Islam, I don't know what happened in some of those regions where Islam got maybe a little more radicalized in some countries where the Jewish population started to feel effects of that.
All right. Yeah, well, that's a really interesting...
I don't know
good for you. No,
all the information on that.
Well, again, so let me give you an example of the areas that I'm much more familiar with. There were big Jewish populations in both Algeria and Tunisia in North Africa. Where did they come from? How long have they been there? Well, there are some estimates that there are Jewish populations in North Africa that go back 2,500, very, very long time, who knows. But the major population influx of Jews into North Africa came from Spain in 1492 when the Muslims and Jews were expelled from Spain when Ferdinand and Isabella united Spain and kicked them out. And this was a flood. And they came throughout North Africa. They actually wound up also in places like Syria and the Middle East, and some in Palestine.
Is that where you get like you see a lot of black people that say they're the black Israelites?
Well, there are some black Israelites from Ethiopia. Okay,
I guess
Sudan.
I'm muddying the waters here. I think.
Well, it's. I mean, I'm interested in all this stuff. So these diversions, I like to. I'm interested in them a lot. But for them, we can come back to that. But let's just stick to the Jews of North Africa. All right. So, and actually, for the moment, the Jews of Tunisia. So Tunisia, little country. I don't even know what the population is anymore. I think it's about 8 million, maybe a little bit bigger. When I lived there as a Peace Corps volunteer and staff member from 1966 to 1969, there were between 225,000 and 250,000 Jews. Today, in Tunisia, there's less than 1,000 Jews. So Tunisia, what happened to the Jews of Tunisia? Under the Ottoman rule, or during that period, Jews were part of this whole system I was talking about. They were people of the book. They did not have the rights of Muslims, nor did Christians, but there was a sizable population, particularly the ones who came from Spain. When French colonialism comes along and it colonizes Tunisia, the key date is 1882. They're there before that a little bit, the French. What is it that the French promised the Jews? What do they say to the Jews? They say, look, you're second-class citizens here. Yes, you've been treated, we might say, economically and to a certain degree culturally. You've been respected, but this is not equality. And by the way, the French were right about that. The system was not an equal system. So what did French colonialism promise the Jews of Tunisia and Algeria? What they promised them is, we're going to end this system. France is going to offer you citizenship. And we don't care, what your religion is, i.e. the French notion of citizenship. It's based on residency and not on your culture or your history or whatever, not based on ethnicity. And this was attractive to many Jews because it was true. They were second-class citizens in the Arab world. And so what you have is the Jewish community in both Tunisia and Algeria is going to split. One part of it is really excited to be French, because being French and getting actually French citizenship, even, it was possible to get it in Algeria and Tunisia. All right. The other part of the population said, hey, France is a colonial power. They're playing games with us here. They're trying to split off one part of our population from the rest. And so parts of the Jewish community were anti-colonial, anti-French, but parts of it were pro-French. Okay, colonialism, particularly in Algeria, that war of independence in Algeria was really, really rough stuff. And war does terrible things to people. And one of the things that happened was that the Jewish population of Algeria, and it was mostly, it's not like it had such a big middle class or upper middle class, but it sided with the French. So it basically did not want to see France to leave. All right, France is kicked out. What happens to the Jewish population? En masse, it leaves. It leaves Algeria. There are virtually no Algerian Jews today. In Tunisia, the anti-colonial movement wasn't as violent. In Algeria, the estimates are 1 million Algerians died fighting and the country only had 8 million people at the time. So we're talking about something, it's not as well known here in the United States. The Tunisian independence movement was rough too, but nothing like Algeria. So when the Tunisian movement was over, the Tunisian Jews stayed in much, much larger numbers until what? Until the 1967 war. And the 1967 war is a turning point in many, many ways, also for American Jews. But it's after the 1967 war that Tunisia just is bled of its Jewish population, which to me is a shame because they were there for so long. So it's a long, complicated history in which it's complex. To me, it's tragic. It's tragic.
Where did they go? Did they go to Israel at that time?
Some of them went to Israel. Most of them went to France. So there are these big and a little bit to Belgium, French-speaking Belgium, but there are these big North African Jewish communities all over France. I mean, they're enormous.
Why did they leave Tunisia? Did you say that and I missed it?
They left it because conditions began to deteriorate for them. The 1967 war it just galvanized so much stuff. In Tunisia, it galvanized this kind of more Muslim variety of nationalism. And after that war, Tunisian Jews didn't feel safe, and they left. That's when I was there, when they were leaving, exactly. And I knew a whole number of these.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So just like when something happens, with the balloon that flew over the U.S. from China, you get Americans who start treating, they see an Asian person who they think is Chinese, they start mistreating them or directing hatred in their direction. You get that from a population, when things happen.
Yeah, well, the anti-Israeli sentiment in North Africa in 1967 was somewhere between powerful and overwhelming. All right. And, the North African Jews, and this, I admit this is anecdotal, but it's what I saw, they were torn. Because for many of these North African Jews, Israel looked like a, shining star.
So they're offering
that's right.
homes and land
right. And so you have this dynamic where the Arab world sees Zionism and Judaism as one, and its Jewish population, it begins to see it as a fifth column or whatever. It's to me it's tragic what happened, but it happened, and that's where they went. Mostly Tunisian Jews wound up in France. Some of the North African Jews do go to Israel. A larger number, if I'm not mistaken, of the Jews of Morocco, which still has, I don't remember if the number is 10,000. The Moroccan Jewish population is still a little bit bigger than the rest, but for the rest, one way or another, they leave, and either they go to France. I've met a couple of them here in Denver, so they're they're here too, but they go to France, and some went to Israel. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and back to what I was saying earlier. After 9/11, in the U.S., people would look at someone who was wearing a hijab or something, and
that's right. Yes, that's right. It was just kind of.
And after the conflict right now, people are doing stuff. They see a Jewish person wearing a yarmulke or something, and they're directing some comments or some hatred towards that. It's like it seems like there's a portion of societies you have this portion of people that are ignorant, that when things happen, we're having a conflict with whoever. I mean, God forbid we have what do we do if we have a conflict with another white nation? Like,
when we're mad at France, we stop talking about French fries. So, yeah.
What do you do? It's just ridiculous.
What you do is you try and fight what's obviously some form of bigotry. But the bigotry seems to follow international relations, if you like, or international incidents. But whatever, it's complicated history. Personally, the history of the North African Jews always fascinated me, and I've actually studied it, written quite a bit about it. So it's, that's why I use it. But similar things are happening in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria, and Lebanon, where there are Jewish populations as well. So this is the second period of turmoil. It's a period right at the end of World War II. And you have the rise of Arab nationalism. Arab nationalism is very strong in this post-war period. And you have Jews that are kind of caught, as we tend to be caught in history once again. And how the heck are we going to get out of this one? So everything we've been talking about is very interesting about the Tunisians, the Algerians, the Polish, the Russians, Germans that were Jewish. Yeah. So when people say that that speaking against Jewish or saying something about Jewish people, it's anti-Semitic. Yeah, let's talk about that.
these people are not, by definition, if you research what Semitic people are. I'm not saying it's a good thing to say, do bad things to Jewish people. I'm just talking about the conversation about the Semitic conversation. You look it up, you see that Palestinians are actually Semitic, from what I understand.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And a German is not Semitic.
That's true.
A Polish person is not Semitic.
That's right.
A Tunisian and Algerian, I'm not sure about. Maybe you can clarify that for me. A Russian is not Semitic. So if these people are of those races, but their religion is Jewish, then how is it anti-Semitism to speak against Israel?
Well,
not even Jewish people,
right.
to speak against Israel.
Well, it isn't.
When Netanyahu himself is Polish, I think.
Yeah. He comes from right where my family came from.
So I'm just confused about that. When you look at the history books, it even says that Palestinians are Semitic people.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. I mean, the terms get confused. So, I mean, anti-Semitism means, of course, discrimination, bigotry against the Semitic peoples. And the Jews and the Arabs are Semitic. There are other peoples, the Assyrians. There's a whole bunch of them. Okay, but what is anti-Semitism today? What does it imply? Even if it's not a dictionary definition, which is what you've given me.
Yeah.
It basically implies discrimination against Jewish people only. All right, and that's true. That is inaccurate for starters. Second thing is what Zionism has tried to do, and it's done it rather successfully, I might add, is to claim that it speaks for Judaism, that Zionism and Judaism are one. The religion and the national sense of being Israeli, that Zionism and Judaism are one. That's it. I.e., if you're critical of Israel and you accept that definition, all right, you're anti-Zionist. Let's say you're anti-Zionist. Well, what Zionism is saying, you can't be anti-Zionism. You can't be anti-Zionist and without hating Jews. That's basically what they're arguing. Now, it's a very clever argument from where I'm sitting. And what does it do to people?
That's what we keep hearing.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So let's say, and I'm making this up, gentlemen, of course, we're very intimate friends for the last 20 minutes or whatever it is, or hour actually has been going on. But let's just say that something happens and you criticize Israel for whatever, settlements or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're attacked. And they say, oh, you can't do that. You're anti-Semitic. You just criticize Israel. Well, what does that do to most people? It paralyzes them. I don't want to be racist. I don't want to be racist.
It forces the conversation to stop.
That's right. Yes, exactly. That's what it's meant to do, and that's what it does. All right? That's exactly what it does. All right? And I was thinking about this because, as someone who's Jewish who criticizes Israel, and I have for the last half century, what do they call me?
Yeah, you're a conundrum in that situation.
All right, so they got to get rid of. They got to get rid of the
self. Is that self hate, or what do you call it?
That's what they call it. Yeah, that they use the term self-hating Jew. All right, what a nonsense term. Or it's a meaningless term. It works, by the way. And then you scratch your head and you say, "Am I self-hating?" Well, first of all, you don't even know what it means. Then, oh my God, I'm self-hating. All right. What they're doing is putting you on the defensive. And I could put it in a more, if you like, polemicized term. It's the racist. How does he defend his racism? He accuses the victim of being racist. He says, I'm not racist. It's you. It's you, the victim. It's basically blaming the victim.
Or if not racist, something else that.
Well, it's some form
yeah.
of bigotry,
Yeah.
all right? Some form of discrimination. You can call it what you want.
Right.
All right? And given the historical experience of World War II and the Holocaust, I want to talk about that too, by the way, a little bit anyhow.
Take as long as you want. We don't have to. We can. I think I see the writing on the wall. We can break this up to a couple different episodes. So keep talking, and we can cut this up.
There's a terrible problem because I was born talking.
I have time, Michael. Do you have time, Michael?
No. Well, I don't know. You know, there are a couple more things.
Don't worry about it. Don't even look at the clock. Just keep going.
I mean, you know, you got me on my favorite subject.
Let's go.
All right?
No, I'm serious. If we sit here for 3 or 4 hours, we'll just cut it in half and we'll just do 2 different episodes. So go.
God, who's going to listen?
They love us. What are you talking about? This is the best podcast on YouTube right now. Number 1 in the world.
I was hoping. Okay.
Let's go.
But okay, for me, this is just the whole thing of accusing people of anti-Semitism that that are critical of Israel, and critical of Israel is a wide range of people. You know, some of the criticisms are kind of minor, and some of them get, if you like, stronger. It's simply nonsense. All right, but it works, and it works here in the United States. It works here, and it works here pretty well. Now, I thought that this was weakening. You know, foolish me. But now I'm hearing it everywhere. You know, that those students in colleges that are criticizing Israel for what it's doing in Gaza, they're anti-Semitic. Oh, please. It's. I mean, to me, it's just the shallowest form of logic and criticism. Call it what you like, but it seems to work. It seems to work. And one of the challenges that's important for these young Jews, I want to come back to these young Jews because you should hear what they're being called now for criticizing Israel. In fact, I'll tell you, they're being called hate groups.
I have seen a movement in the younger Jewish generations, I guess I call them, or that they don't align, their beliefs don't align with is Israel and the government of Israel, because I also see some Israelis, younger Israelis. That's kind of why I was stuttering, because you have Jewish people all over the world, but then you have Israelis who are also Jewish. So I see younger Israelis that also, they have Arab friends, they have Palestinian friends,
yes,
and they don't like this whole old school thing that's been dominating their government, and
they've broken with it. And for me, it's like a joy to see it. Now, I'm not exactly sure. I can't explain it all that well. I know some of the reasons. So what are some of the reasons that younger Jews, because look, in my generation, I am an anomaly, okay? A Jew who is a lifetime of being critical of what Israel's doing to the Palestinians. That is absolutely...
I've seen a lot of older Jewish people.
Well, good for you.
That are like that.
I hope they're more than I think. But I want to tell you that what's happening now with these young folks that are joining groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, in my experience, it's unprecedented. And I'm not saying that I can explain it all, but I can explain some of it. So for some of them, they've gone to Israel. And the ones who get it are the ones who say, hey, I'm going to go to East Jerusalem, where the Arabs are, and where they're told if they go, they're going to get knifed or stabbed or some terrible thing's going to happen. And they go to East Jerusalem, and just like West Jerusalem, just nice folk, you know. The ones who go to the West Bank, that's an education in and of itself. There was a period, it lasted for quite a while. You know, you talk about this stuff, and friends of mine, the classic expression, I mean, I have many Jewish friends, and they're mostly very concerned about stuff, politically liberal or left, except for one issue, Israel. All right? And there's the wall. So we call it liberal on everything but. The liberal on everything but crowd. So what happened to these young kids? Well, some of them went and they saw. That's all you have to do. Literally, I can't tell you how many people that I know who we'd be in an argument, maybe not an argument, but we wouldn't see things the same way, and they would go. And I have one friend. He went, a trade unionist, really did all kinds of wonderful work. He never went to Israel, and seen a lot of stuff in the world. Comes back, he's calling me on the telephone from the airport. He was so upset with what he's seen. So some of it is actually seeing, rather than hearing, seeing what goes on and what the occupation is in practice, and being horrified, literally. That's one part of it. The other part of it, and I don't know, how much it plays into it, and social media, certainly. There's stuff on social media you can't find on mainstream media, like this interview, all right? But many other things. And kids who have at least half a mind, they begin to discern, separate fact from fiction, if you like. And a lot of the stuff that they see is just, hey, this isn't what I've been told. And then finally, it's what you were talking about. Jews are very assimilated, tend to be an urban population, assimilated. You grow up Jewish, you're probably in a city. You're in a city, you're going to be dealing with a lot more people of color, immigrants, stuff like that. I can't tell you how many when I was teaching at DU, I had a lot of Jewish students. It was very common for them to have an Arab friend or a Palestinian friend. So I don't know all of the things that have made for this qualitative change, but I think that what I've just described to you are some of the elements of it. But there's something else that goes on here, and this is what I'm seeing with these young folks from Jewish Voice for Peace. They feel really ripped off. Why? Because what they have been told their whole life, in so many ways, whether it's through their synagogue, whether it's through their family, or whatever, is simply a lie. And this causes a real crisis. This causes a real crisis, and some of them, you deal with these crises in different ways. For some of them, it's like, okay, I know, but this is too painful. This is too painful for me to, cut with my family and my friends. And then there are these others who just have begun to say, this isn't right. We have to do something about it. And in large measure, why? Because they, the Zionists, are speaking in our name. That's why I'm involved. That's real simple, It's like, hey, I don't like this stuff. This is wrong. But whatever the reasons are, it is a qualitative shift that I have not seen until recently, and I welcome it very much so.
Yeah, you see it happening, I believe. I also see it happening also in the Muslim world with the younger generations. They're focusing more on women's rights and other things to try to change cultures in a better direction.
Yes, with the 21st century,
yeah,
there's certain democratic values and understandings. They're global.
I think it's ironic that a lot of Americans and other people in what we call Western societies judge these countries that are behind a little bit, because even in the last century, America, there was people marrying 13-year-old girls. There was women didn't have equal rights. I don't.
Right.
What's the year when women could even start voting? I think it was in the 1900s, sometime.
I think it's around 1920, and yeah, when they finally were able to vote.
Yeah. So just because we're ahead of these other countries, we sit there and point fingers at them all day long. When just yesterday, which 100 years is not a long time.
No.
Just yesterday, we were doing all of the same things.
It's a very good point. You see this with immigrant families so much. So the parents of the family, the ones who come over, and this is my experience. I don't want to generalize too much, but it's what I've seen. What can I say? The parents come over, they're very conservative, and not just in terms of the cultural stuff that they bring with them, but they don't want to rock the boat here in the United States. They want to stay, and they tend to, at least historically, they used to become Republicans. What are their kids like? Very different. They've learned the language, they've been educated in the schools, and very often the differences between the parents and the children are both cultural and political. They're beginning to mainstream, and by the third or fourth generation, it's an entirely different world. They've become whatever. They've learned to participate in whatever country that they've immigrated to. So it's a very interesting thing to see, and in some ways it's a little disturbing, in that the cultural changes within families are so dramatic, and it leads to all kinds of conflicts between the older and younger generations, some of which are somehow resolved, but many of which are not, if you really study it. So yeah, there's all that's going on too. Yes, and it's very interesting.
It just confused me and perplexed me that the people who are more advanced always judge the people who are less advanced in a negative way.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, rather than seeing themselves in the past in these people.
And not just in a negative way. Yes, it's a negative way, but it's a condescending way.
Arrogant way at
times.
It's
an arrogant and condescending, and there's a word that I use for that you seem to kind of shy from a little bit. It's racist. It's you're just assuming your superiority.
Well, that's assuming they're of a different race, right?
Well, it's one thing to assume people are of a different race. It's another thing to assume that because they're from a different race or a different ethnicity, whatever you want to call it, that somehow or other they're not quite as good as us. That's where it gets, if you like, a bit ugly from, and it's very, very, very common. And some of it comes from what I would call understandable things, i.e., somebody comes from a foreign culture. It's hard not to generalize about them. They look different, they eat different food, whatever. It's a little bit hard at first to get to their humanity, or for them to get to ours, for that matter. But that's the challenge, is kind of to get beyond those stereotypes to folk, so to speak. Who are they?
Yeah, but at the same time, those same societies celebrate the fact that they used to be cavemen.
Well, that's we all were that.
You know what I mean?
Way back in the day. Yeah.
So how much more ignorant can you get?
Not much more.
Right?
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So I guess back to the conversation. I think we're kind of talking about where we've gotten through where the Israeli government was established.
Right.
Where do you want to go from there? I mean, I know.
I don't know.
There's also different parties in the Israeli government that kind of seem to be at constant conflict with one another as well.
Yes. Well,
by a drastic distance, not like Republicans and Democrats.
Well, they're pretty far apart these days too, but still, at the base of Israeli society, you have basically two populations that have their own political structures for the most part. One are those European Jews who come from Poland or Russia or wherever in Europe. And the other are the Jews who come from the Middle East and North Africa. And
so is that what it is? I didn't know what the differences were.
That's the big difference, yeah. And those are the Arab Jews, like the Tunisian and Algerian ones we were speaking about.
Are the ones that come from Iran?
Yes. And they're referred to as Sephardic Jews.
So it's Sephardic?
Sephardic Jews. So the Sephardic Jews.
And what is the other party?
They're called Ashkenazi. The Ashkenazi. Now, I don't know the derivation of the word, but I did have a college friend whose last name was Ashkenazi, Carol Ashkenazi.
Representing.
Yes, she certainly was that. So politically speaking, the more secular, and not all of them, actually not all of them at all, but at least some of them, more liberal oriented. So, you would hear Jewish, Israeli socialism or whatever. The Sephardic Jews, okay, class-wise are the underclass, for the most part, more of the underclass. They're also the larger part of the population, by the way.
So they're the larger part of the population.
Yes, they are.
And that's why they're able to struggle against the other party. Because
that's recent. That's relative. Well, for the first, I can't give you a real decade, but it seems to me that things started to change sometime in the 1990s. So up until the 1990s, from 48, let's say for a half a century.
So are their parties separated by races?
In principle, no. In fact, yes. Pretty much. Yes. In fact, pretty much. In fact, the European Jews have most of their own parties, and the Sephardic Jews have their own parties. But what has happened, all right, the Sephardic Jews, their interests are the interests of the underclass economically, and also the Jews of the Arab world. But they have made alliances with the super duper religious Orthodox sects. So, like if you look today in the United States, when Donald Trump became president, he brought together economic conservatives, if you like, and Christian fundamentalists. Okay, that's a united front of sort of.
I'm listening. I'm just getting something ready that I want to talk to you about.
All right, sure.
Please keep talking.
So you've got that. Anyhow, this alliance of these Sephardic Jewish groups and the religious right, that's what's come to power in Israel. And it has displaced what for 50, 60 years was the more secular elements of the Jewish community. Now, when it comes to the Palestinians, the differences between the two are minor, okay? The Ashkenazi Jews are for what I would refer to as a slower process of ethnic cleansing, whereas the Sephardic Jews and their religious allies, and this is actually the religious allies are the ones that are pushing it, they're the ones that, let's ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians and, expropriate the land. So yes, that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing a shift in Israeli policy where the religious right and the Sephardic elements of the population have come to power, and the Ben Gurions and the Golda Meirs and the rabbins who represented this other trend, they're weaker. And that's a split in Israeli society, literally the split in Israeli society that exists today, and it's quite sharp.
I was aware of the split, as it's called, and how I knew how these two parties kind of go at each other, but I didn't understand everything that you just
it's interesting.
According to the National Institute of Health, the first appearance of the word Ashkenazi is in the Hebrew Bible in Genesis 10:3 as a reference to the kingdom of Ashkenaz.
Oh, wow.
It's referenced as the name of one of Noah's descendants.
That is quite interesting, and I did not know that.
So maybe that's why they use that, maybe?
I don't know. I don't know where the term came from. I never really looked into that part of it. But I do know that it's the characterization of European Jewry particularly Central and Eastern European Jews, which is where my folks came from.
So the migration of all of these people to Israel, I guess I have a couple questions, and I have a so. I guess let me play this video for you first and get your thoughts.
Sure.
This is a gentleman from New York, I believe.
Okay.
I think his name, and you may have seen this video. It's a pretty popular video. His name is Yakub, I think.
Oh, I've seen this young man.
Yeah, Jacob Yakub. For those of you listening, that Yakub means Jacob in
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
Yeah, I've seen this.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
So this isn't really the video I was hoping for. The video I wanted to play was the whole entire conversation with Yakub. It basically, he just argues with the people that he's stealing the house from. And, that's kind of like the thing, right? Like somebody comes, they drag a Palestinian family out or they kick them out. And the idea forces just kind of support that and just at least protect the settlers or guys like Yakub or whatever's going on in the situation. And there you go.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm
So-
just curious what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
Well, it's a microcosm of the whole problem
sure.
in one little incident.
Yeah.
A guy from Brooklyn who looks like he should do a little more exercise than he has done.
Especially if he's going to go to war with some people
Yeah,
and take their shit. You
Right.
think he'd, be able to hold it down. But he has the IDF to protect him.
Right.
So.
I mean, he's just basically kicking out a family. Of course, he's saying, I'm not doing it, which, well, he is doing it. He's part of it. Of course, he's not at the top of the system. It's a microcosm for what Israel has done for the past 75 years, right there. Yeah, you see it. That's the source of the problem. And, of course, keep in mind, struggles over land are really nasty. People fighting to hold their land, people trying to seize land, they're nasty. And when you see his explanation, let's just say it doesn't resonate very well, does it? I mean, he just looks terrible, and he is the way he's talking to these people. I don't know what else to say about it.
Sure. I mean,
Unless,
yeah, I just want your thoughts on it.
yeah,
Obviously, you don't have the answers other than what you provided. But yeah, we didn't even get into the current conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and that's fine. I mean, that history, that foundation, I think is important, and we would love to have you back soon.
Really.
To
All right.
do a second part to this, to actually talk about the current conflict.
I would like to do that very much. I'm, needless to say, concerned about it. Without going into a long thing, I would say this. Don't underestimate the possibility of this blowing up even further and becoming a more regional conflict. The danger is there. You can see it all. American bases are being hit in Syria and in Iraq. The last I saw since October 7th, more than 60 missile strikes on U.S. military bases. The Yemenis are sending missiles at ships going through the Red Sea on their way to Israel. We've got, if not the biggest armada, one of the biggest armadas in history, off the Eastern Mediterranean on the one hand, and the Red Sea, some of it going on into the Persian Gulf. We got, all someone needs to do is light the match. So there's that element of it that we need to talk about. And then there's what, the whole October 7th event, what's going on now. And we talk about all that. My concern is what the United States is doing to try to, or isn't doing, to try to improve the situation and just, freeze the war so we can turn it around, hard as that might sound. I will say this. Most Middle East wars, they only last for a month or two. And the war itself triggers a negotiating process. So my hope is, for as horrible as this particular conflict is at present, that it will become the fuel for some kind of negotiating process. I don't know that will happen, but that's certainly what I would support. But I tell you what, why don't we leave that for next time? And I could come back in a week or so if that works for you guys. And
Absolutely, yeah. All right, we'll get you on the schedule and we'll have you back.
Okay, good. Then this would be, because actually I didn't realize it. We started right around 4, I think, a little bit after. My God. Yeah.
Yeah, about 2 hours.
Yeah.
Outside of the bathroom break, 2 hours.
Yeah, outside of the bathroom break. All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rob. I appreciate you coming.
Well, thank you both. I really, I enjoyed it and I hope it was useful.
A great conversation, and I appreciate your time. We'll have you back soon.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Rob.
All right, you're welcome.